Richard Carrier is an author and a prominent blogger and public speaker within the atheist community. He has a PhD in Greek and Roman intellectual thought from Columbia University. Richard, in my article entitled What is Atheism Plus and Do We Need It in the Huffington Post, I essentially presented an argument that said that some of the principles behind Atheism Plus, such as sexual, social and racial equality, were addressed by other mainstream political ideologies, therefore asking the question, in what context could Atheism Plus be different and offer something that other ideologies do not? That was one aspect of it, and the other aspect of it was, in what sense could atheism become a political movement? That is, how could atheism offer something to the political world in terms of economic disciplines or foreign policies? Now, that necessarily isn't such the case with Atheism Plus, but my first principle in terms of what it could offer that other ideologies do not offer has been a contentious issue, and you took up some issues with that. So firstly, I'd like to get your thoughts on what Atheism Plus is for you and other movements in the skeptic community, and what problems you had with my article.
Right. Basically I'll just explain a few things that I think will put it in perspective as to where I'm coming from on this. Mm-hmm. First of all, atheism is a social movement. We have national conferences, we have local meetups, we have lectures, we have national and international organizations. So it's a movement, and it has the goal of making more and better atheists and giving them resources and a comfortable social environment is another main goal. Second, to make more atheists, I think we as a social movement need to appeal to more women and minorities, including groups in other countries. For example, atheists and potential atheists in Ghana or India, which are the two regions that I've worked with in my past. And even among white males, for example, we need to appeal to a wider demographic than those who just want to talk about God all the time. Far more people of all demographics, I find, want to talk about how atheists, as atheists, would solve social problems or make a difference in the world, or who want atheists, as atheists, to question other things, like claims being made in the political or moral domain, and not just talk about creationism or theology all of the time. Mm-hmm. And third, this means we need to talk about more of those other issues in our conferences and meetups and periodicals. And to an extent, that's actually happening. That's part of the impact we've been having even before we gave a name to what we were doing. We had already been influencing conferences and periodicals and meetups to do this kind of thing, and we're seeing more and more interesting topics being discussed and debated in these venues. And to me, it's about talking about how atheists, as atheists, have a perspective and how we might solve social problems or make a difference in the world, or what information we need to come to decisions on that. Even if we're not going to talk about what we should do, we can at least have, for example, an economist come and say, these are the kinds of things you need to know, for example. And these are the kinds of things we want to see at meetup groups, because oftentimes they have speakers that talk about subjects. It's things we want to see talked about in conferences, in our periodicals, and so on. And also other issues that interest women and minorities who are atheists or potential atheists, and then, again, including minorities in other countries like Indians and Ghanaians and so on. And this includes hearing skeptical and informed talks about the facts in economics, or prison reform, or the treatment of women and other issues that matter to people. So basically, so that atheists aren't bored out of the movement by constant God talk, or driven out, more pressingly of late, driven out by actual sexism or persistent disinterest in what matters to minorities. And I think there's this kind of actually rose as a reaction to Atheism Plus. I didn't expect it to occur. I thought everybody would be on board with opposing sexism in the movement and things like that. I didn't think that would become an issue, but it has become an issue. And I'm not the one driving that, or the Atheism Plus movement didn't drive that. That was a reaction to Atheism Plus saying that there's sexism. And one of the biggest responses is, no, there isn't. And so we have to keep documenting it. Okay. And that kind of debate occurs. And also, for example, the Black atheism movement in America exists. They have organizations, there are groups and so on. Yet it's almost wholly disconnected from the white atheism movement because they care about different things. They have different issues. Yet I see there's no reason why we should not care about those things too. Other than our not caring about what affects Black atheists. In other words, our not caring about Black atheists, which to me is covertly racist attitude. I mean, it's rather hard to defend. And in any event, it can't grow the movement because is excluding a major demographic. I think we should be working and cooperating more with the Black Atheism movement and helping them grow their movement as well. And I think this also includes actually doing things like, for example, making our websites and events more accessible to the disabled, and maybe actually getting involved in issues that matter to most actual atheists, like, for example, the education disparity between white and black communities. Since access to good education is the most important factor there is in making more atheists. I mean, think about it. So it makes no sense for the atheism movement as a whole to be disinterested in this or to do nothing about it. And there are many other issues I can make the same point on. And above all, like I mentioned before, we have a problem with atheists now, even more so, invading our spaces online and to a lesser extent in the physical world, and pretending to speak for us, yet who are engaging in sexist and misogynistic behavior. I mean, really ruthless and undesirable behavior. Or they're otherwise angrily telling us that what we can't or shouldn't be talking about. And that makes it harder for me to distinguish what I call the asshole atheism from the kind of atheism I represent and the kind of atheists I want the company of and that I want there to be more of. And it used to be that the label atheist did that. There was occasion where I thought if someone identified as an atheist, I knew I could probably get along with them and they'd be good company. But now that we have this cohort of assholes who are treating people horribly and sandbag everything we try to do and who really totally suck as company, I need some way to tell those people apart from the ones I want to work with. And Atheism Plus is sort of one way to do that. It's not sufficient in itself because I know plenty of well-meaning people who just don't like the label, even if they're totally on board with what it labels. So that's a separate matter altogether. But understood in these terms, your article seems kind of out of touch with what Atheism Plus is and what its advocates have been actually calling for. For example, we aren't actually asking atheists to adopt a progressive political agenda. We're asking atheists to start talking about what we as atheists think might be the right path politically and morally, and to have honest and rational debates about it, rather than sticking our heads in the sand and pretending these opinions and disputes don't exist among us.
Okay.
And to give you a specific example, in America we have the Libertarian Party. Libertarians often are at odds with progressives in the atheism movement. But really, libertarians should care about social justice every bit as much as progressives do, right? They only differ in what they think will solve the problem. But that's a claim to fact, and as such, it can be verified or critiqued on logic and evidence. And so we want to hear these debates out. I mean, we no longer want to pretend they don't exist. And indeed, our pretending they don't exist, I see, is precisely what is driving away a lot of potential supporting members. I've had numerous conversations with people who said they'd come to our meetings and donate to our organizations if we actually talked about things that matter, rather than just talking about God all the time, because they became atheists partly to avoid having to talk about God all the time. My wife is one of these people. So I saw your article as being wrong about the demographic reality of atheism and our objectives in terms of growing atheism as a movement. I mean, I think Atheism Plus, or something like it, whatever it's called, is needed to grow the movement. I mean, I think we've reached pretty much market saturation with the old atheist model. We now need to start appealing to people who care about things other than just God talk, but who are also atheists, and therefore we can socialize and network and grow as a social movement together in that sense. So I also think your article's conclusion is wrong about the connection between atheism as a movement and political and moral decision-making in general. For me, for atheists to not care about the political decisions our countries make is to divorce atheism from citizenship and moral responsibility, which is the last thing we should want to do to atheism as a movement. I mean, we should really care about those things. We should be talking about those things. And it kind of seemed like you contradicted yourself on that point when you were arguing we should not be doing this, but at the same time you didn't argue that prominent new atheists like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens have already been doing it, so we don't need to renew any effort to make it happen. But to me, I mean, which is it? I mean, should we not be calling for more social and moral commitment and concern and conversation from our community? Or do we not need to because atheists as a movement are already fully embracing social and moral commitment and concern and already talking about those things? So we can start with that question, but I'm sure you have others to ask me besides. But that's basically the one main reply I have to your article.
Sure. To a certain extent, with the atheist movement, in terms of what I was saying is, I don't necessarily agree in that respect that the old movement, say the Four Horsemen of atheism, which essentially deals with the philosophical questions of atheism, that becomes a social movement in itself. Now, any kind of social movement can have discrepancies and social inequalities in it, and I can understand that the old established traditional platform of atheism that's gone for the last 100 years plus predominantly is and has been run by well-educated white men. I see that, and I appreciate that you want to transgress the atheist movement into putting atheism into different directions. So, for example, we're all atheists, but why isn't we don't include minority atheists, female atheists, feminist atheists, racial atheists, such as obviously black atheists and atheists from Catholic countries, parts of Mediterranean Europe and South America still have a Catholic stronghold, and it's good to get atheism into that corner and obviously encourage more atheists to come in. Now, what I was saying essentially, which is I don't particularly see, and this is one aspect that I disagree with you, I don't particularly see how an atheist viewpoint or a skeptical thinking viewpoint or a general critical thinking viewpoint can be in itself specifically applied to political policy and current affairs. And I'll just give you some examples of this from other areas. So what would an atheist opinion be on the type of welfare distribution that's required in society? I don't know how an atheist stance would impact on that particularly. I know in America it's slightly different, where obviously the question between God and politics is not a subtle one at all. It's obviously quite fractured. In Europe and the UK, no one really cares about anyone's religious views. Our politicians in this country don't state whether they're theists or atheists, and no one seems to be bothered about that. In America, for example, very few practicing scientists are theists. In Europe, it's a different question. Many practicing scientists are theists. So, for example, in America, Francis Collins, the Human Genome Project, he is a Christian, yet that doesn't at all impact his research in science, as obviously you can see by the legacy of his work. So I don't particularly see how being an atheist, and whether we liaise or invite economists or political scientists or sociologists to have these conversations with, I don't see specifically how this atheist attitude, whether it's a philosophical or a political movement, can actually bring any kind of differences to the political spectrum. I appreciate that obviously it can change specific aspects internally within the movement. I completely agree with there's obviously certain overhauls that are needed between obviously bringing women to the front stage, bringing racial minority to the front stage in the atheist movement itself, but I don't see how atheism can have a particular political voice when it comes to policy.
Right. Well, I think, first of all, we need to disengage the idea that we need a policy platform, for example. That's not even the issue. The issue is there are problems that we do care about, and we as atheists, as a social movement, want to discuss them more. And we also have a perspective that is different from Christians. If we talk about Collins not letting his religiosity affect science, I find it very unlikely that he doesn't let his religiosity affect his political and moral beliefs. And so for me, from my perspective, atheists differ from other theists and religionists who aren't specifically theists, in that we don't think morality or political decisions come from on high. We're not trying to figure out the mind or will of an imaginary being. We're not relying on scriptures. We don't believe in dogmas or anything like that. We think everything can be questioned. Everything should be evidence-based. And that's something that is distinctive of atheism. And it's relevant because we are the movement that's grown and is really huge, certainly in America, but also in other countries. I've spoken to atheist meetup groups and atheist organizations in England as well. So the movement does exist there, and in Germany and other places, in the Philippines and so on. It hasn't grown to be